Actually, why my homemade fuel does not clog up the injectors is because on how I clean and process the motor oil before mixing it and running it into the truck. To be honest, I thought I was going to have to take the injectors out every once in a while and clean them, but I've been running this fuel in this motor for over 4 years now. I still have never had to clean the injectors. The only thing I've ever had clog up on me was the fuel filter. And that was only because the one day I didn't clean out my hose before filling up my truck, so it pumped a lot of dirt in the tank. So yeah, this motor has been running 4 years on my homemade diesel fuel of used motor oil and gasoline. So the motor has over 250,000 miles and it still runs great. So if you have any more questions on my homemade diesel fuel of motor oil or any questions on Stinky Pete, feel free to ask or leave a comment. Yes, I do get better gas mileage on my homemade diesel fuel made out of used motor oil. Stinky Pete used to get between 15 to 18 miles per gallon on regular diesel fuel on the highway. Now I average 23 miles per gallon on my homemade diesel fuel. I put a 30-gallon gas tank in Stinky Pete. So on one tank of gas for 30 gallons at 23 miles per gallon, I get about 660 miles for one tank of fuel. My winter blend of homemade diesel fuel is 20% gas to 80% motor oil for Stinky Pete, which costs me 20 cents per gallon. So 30 gallons would be $6 out of pocket for my winter blend. During the summer, that would be only $3 to fill up my truck. So leave a comment, tell me what you think. If you have any other questions, please leave a comment and I'll get to as many as I can. Good question. My homemade diesel fuel made out of used motor oil and gasoline does not separate. I've had totes of fuel sit for like 3 years and it has not separated. The only thing that has ever happened with fuel sitting for a long time is if it's not in an airtight container, the gasoline evaporates and then I have to add more gasoline to it. To answer some of your questions on other stuff, I get all my used motor oil from local garages. And I get the gasoline from junkyards. It's what they drain out of old cars. The motor is all stock. Factory injectors, factory injection pump. All I ever did was tune the injection pump to run on the homemade diesel fuel because the homemade diesel fuel has more energy per ounce than regular diesel fuel. So I cut the fuel mixture back. And yes, I can run on regular diesel fuel anytime. The other question I get, does it smoke? Only at an idle. If I could cut the fuel mixture back some more, it would not smoke at all. So comment for more. This is the most common question I get about my homemade diesel fuel out of used motor oil and gasoline. For starters, I do not know the laws for your state or county. So please don't ask me. And I've talked to DOT, IRS, attorneys, police officers, and a judge. They say it's perfectly legal for me to make my homemade diesel fuel and run it in my truck. But there are some rules. I cannot sell my homemade diesel fuel. I cannot use my diesel fuel in a commercial vehicle. Without getting into fine details, I'll explain the best I can. Back in the 50s, they had two-stroke cars that you had to mix motor oil with gasoline for the motors. And they also had diesel trucks that you mix diesel fuel and motor oil. You also mix gas and oil for your chainsaws, weed whackers, boats, jet skis. So it's perfectly legal to mix gas and oil for Stinky Pete. The judge said if I did get a ticket, it's just them throwing crap at the wall to see what sticks. No, my homemade diesel fuel made out of used motor oil does not work in newer trucks. Most new diesel motors have what's called common rails. Because of the thickness of the fuel and the DEF systems, they'll just shut right down. They won't even work. You need a diesel motor with a direct injection pump. So at the right time, the fuel is being pumped at 3,000 psi through these metal lines into the injectors. I could run 100% used motor oil, but the factory diaphragm pump is not strong enough to pump it out of the fuel tank, through the fuel filter, and into the pump. Once it's in the pump, there's another pump inside this VE pump that pressurizes it up to 100 psi inside the pump to get it into the pumping mechanism to be pumped into the cylinders. So that's why I add that 10 to 30% gasoline. So if you have any more questions, please leave a comment. I'll try to answer as many as I can. So why I started making my homemade diesel fuel out of motor oil about 3 years ago. It was the middle of a blizzard. We had over a foot of snow and was halfway through the storm and I had no money for fuel. I was laid off of work at the time because I work in construction and also nobody paid me for snow plowing yet. So I'm in the garage looking around, see what we have. I was looking through gas cans, see if we had any kerosene or diesel, diesel, whatever I had. But I know military vehicles used to run on motor oil and mixed fuels and stuff like that. So I grabbed some motor oil, I grabbed some gasoline, and I started mixing up little batches. Just like this, and started running little tests on it. Viscosity, density. I also put it in the freezer with ice water and salt to see if it will gel up. So I started running little samples through the motor and it ran great. So yeah, I was worried about it breaking down at first, you know, like clogging up the fuel filter injectors or something. But after getting through that snowstorm, I started working on proper techniques to filter and process the motor oil. Any other questions? Leave a comment. I've done a video on this before, but I'll do it again. For starters, I don't know what the laws are for your state or county, but I'm only talking about my state and county. I've talked to friends of mine that are attorneys. I even talked to a judge and police officers and stuff like that. I've checked into all this and made sure everything was legal before making TikTok videos to the public. There's no sales tax on it because I'm making it for myself. I'm not selling it. So that's why I don't have to worry about sales tax unless I'm selling it. Perfectly legal to run in my farm tractors and heat the house and stuff like that. Now, road taxes. Now, the legal term for my homemade diesel fuel is mixed gasoline, which I do pay the road taxes on that. And also, Stinky Pete is not a commercial vehicle. And also, I don't drive Stinky Pete that much. You know, this is another common question I get, how many miles per gallon? So I'll tell you. So around town, I average about 18 miles per gallon. But on the highway, I get about 24, 25 miles per gallon with Stinky Pete. Other questions I get asked a lot is, does Stinky Pete still run on regular diesel fuel? Yes, it can. If I run regular diesel in it now, it just will not want to idle. I would have to give it a little bit of throttle to keep it from stalling out, but that's it. It will run fine. On regular diesel fuel, Stinky Pete used to get about 12 miles per gallon around town and 18 miles per gallon on the highway. So, with a 30-gallon gas tank on one tank of fuel at about 23 miles per gallon on average, I can get a little over 600 miles to one tank of fuel. And one tank of fuel costs me between $3 to $6 per gallon, depending on if it's my summer blend or my winter blend. So if you have any more questions, please leave a comment. Yes, Stinky Pete can roll coal, but I have it turned down so it does not. But so many of you have been asking for it, so what I'm going to do is put the aftermarket governor spring and fuel pin in and crank up the pump for you guys. So I'm going to post some videos later. I don't think you understand. I do care about people, so that's why I've been telling people how to make homemade diesel fuel out of used motor oil and gasoline. And I'm saving a little over $3 a gallon. I'm not polluting the air, I'm just keeping the polar bears warm. You want me to stop running my homemade diesel fuel? How about this? Make me. And I don't understand how you're saying how it's hurting the environment. The only thing coming out of the tailpipe besides CO2, which trees turn into oxygen, is carbon. Carbon is not harmful to the environment. It's even used in most inks and makeups. If it was so dangerous... no, it's not dangerous. And one more thing.